So woke up a few minutes later with the whir of helicopters, one of these diffusing robots looking in through the window, a crowd of snipers around, and all they've done is nod off our chanting Gayatri.
It's time to get inspired. Join us as we celebrate devotee success stories. Preaching, business, community development, leadership and personal growth, all from the point of view of Krishna consciousness. Our goal? To help you to make your life successful. Hare Krishna, welcome back. This is episode 28, and we are meeting my friend and mentor Damodar Prabhu again. We're going to be discussing about his life, how he came to Krishna consciousness, and what it's like to be a temple president and the challenges that it requires. Just before we get into that interview, I'd like to let you know that if you would like to get some more training, then you can go to successfulvaishnavas.com/class, and that's where you can find the registration or the replays of recent trainings that I've been doing. The most recent training, which I'll be presenting shortly, is about how to align your life so that you can make money in a way that inspires you and which is connected to Krishna consciousness, so that we can have a life where everything that we do is going in the same direction. Instead of making money over here and then in our spare time doing some preaching, we can actually have a life where all of our energy is towards developing our own Krishna consciousness and sharing it with others, while at the same time making a living doing it. So I hope you find that topic interesting, and depending when you listen to this podcast, you might find that there's other training available when you go to successfulvaishnavas.com/class. So with that said, let's go and listen to the interview with Damodar Prabhu and see what life is like as a temple president in the Hare Krishna movement. I'm so happy I'm here with my god brother and very dear friend and mentor, Damodar Prabhu again. We spoke about 7 habits of highly effective people last time we were together, and today it's going to be a little bit more freeform because we always have really interesting conversations. So I have faith that Krishna will guide us to speak about something that may be of interest to others, and I know for sure I'll find something of value out of it. So it's nice to meet up again, Prabhu.
Yeah, nice to see you again.
Yeah. So I think last time when we spoke, we never really gave an introduction so much about how you became a devotee. Maybe that would be quite an interesting place to start. Just give it a little bit of your background.
Well, I was one of those fortunate souls that was born in a family of devotees, although they weren't active at the time of my birth. From the age maybe of about 5, my uncle was involved with ISKCON, became Srila Prabhupada's disciple. From the age of 8, I was visiting the temples. And at 17 I joined. In fact, I used to spend every summer with him from about the age of 11 upwards. And it was always weird going back to the non-devotee life, having lived as a devotee for all intents and purposes on his simple living, high-thinking farm. Mm. Amazing.
So you went to a Catholic school?
Went to a Catholic boarding school.
How was that, knowing what you know as a devotee at the time, what was it like being at a Catholic school?
There must have already been some kind of interest in God, because voluntarily I went to Mass every single day. There was a morning Mass at 7:15 or something in the mornings, and I didn't miss one. So there was already some kind of searching. Eventually it just didn't really provide big answers to the big questions, or satisfactory answers. But the taste was somehow there.
Interesting. when I was at school, I was at an Anglican school, and about the age of 11, then they have confirmation class. Because in the Anglicans you get baptised when you're born, basically. You don't have much to say in the matter. So there's a period where you make the choice that I'm going to be a Christian. So I went to the first, confirmation class, and then I thought, oh, wait a minute, I'm not going to just sign up for this. I want to see what my options are, at that stage. But around about the same time, I volunteered to be a sacristan or something to help at the chapel. And so I went there and they said, oh, sorry, we're full. We've got enough already. It's like
Heaven's full.
Yeah, totally. It was like, I wanted to, try to learn about God and do some service. And they're like, oh, no, we have enough pujaris or whatever.
Wow.
Yeah, it just reminded me of that that story. But yeah, so you obviously already you had that attraction to God, but you found that the Catholic upbringing wasn't as complete as what you were getting from Krishna consciousness.
I remember a conversation with my grandmother when I was maybe about 9. I think she was readying me to go to this Catholic boarding school just because it offered a really good private education. And talking about some belief that we didn't die, that possibly we simply went on to whatever, maybe that we didn't even know that we'd died, that we somehow kept on living out our life in whatever way we were destined to do. So I just remember later thinking, wow, where did that come from? Even having those kind of beliefs about existence.
Yeah, cool. And what was it like once you, joined the temple, so to speak, when you were 17, you became a brahmacari?
Initially it was a little shocking because the ISKCON that I'd learned about was the ISKCON of the 70s, which is when my uncle had been involved, uncle and aunt. And this were the days, it was 1984, Bhagawan was at the helm of the UK Yatra. There was a lot of rank pulling, is how I remember it. I remember being put in my place a lot and thinking, oh, okay, this is not quite the loving community that I'd been led to believe it might be. It was still ecstatic. Initially I thought I'll join for 3 months and then I'll go back and open an ashram in Nottingham, where I came from.
Right, 1970s style.
Yeah, I thought,
That's what you do, right? You go there for a few months and then you start a temple.
That's the program. The one book that I'd read before joining was Every Town and Village. And so that was the impression I had of what the Krishna consciousness movement was. But it was ecstatic. A typical day for a Bhakta in those days, we were in a little house called Aldenham, which is about 5 miles from the manor. So we used to get up that little bit earlier to make sure we got to Mangalati. Prabhupada used to wake us up from Prabhupada tape, happening album or whatever.
Vandeham.
Exactly. Great way to wake up.
Yeah.
Everyone used to scurry around. We used to jump in the van, get to the manor, do the entire morning program, and then go and wash the pots, and probably spend till about midday washing pots. No, I think we used to go on Hare Naam daily. It was a pretty nice program. And it was very quick that I realised, you don't just kind of, once you've moved in, this is it, this is what you do. I remember when I was going home to see my grandmother for Christmas, and I was really nervous about approaching Shiv Ram Swami to ask permission.
Right.
And yet because he seemed so stern on the exterior, but he was very warm, and he then asked me if I wanted to join the National Sankirtan Party upon returning. In those days, Sankirtan devotees didn't belong to individual temples, but they were part of a national party. Although what was called Sankirtan in those days was selling paintings and prints. So I did that for a few months. And then probably late 85, everyone converted over to book distribution. Maybe I've got the dates wrong.
Right.
But Sankirtan became Sankirtan.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
It took a little bit longer for that to happen in New Zealand.
I may have got the dates wrong.
Yeah.
But that's the way I remember it. Sometime around there I became part of the Soho Street Temple, having been on, national travelling. That was disbanded.
Yeah.
So this might have been when Bhagavan left in 86.
What was the catalyst for that to happen?
Maybe it was Bhagavan leaving.
Right. They just sort of go back to the roots type of thing or something.
Wolverheath, which was the holding company, which used to organise all of that side of thing, was wound up. And I think everything was then distributed back out to the individual temples. But not, the exact chronography of all of that. I can't remember.
Interesting. So then you went to Soho Street after that?
Soho Street, and I was still on a lot of travelling Sankirtan. We used to go out in vans. That was quite an austere program, living in the van.
The van
showering
ashram.
out of a bucket. Yeah, the van ashram. But that was also really exciting, particularly to do book distribution. And I did book distribution in a few different forms. There was something called the board, where people would ask for donations and give a book at the end. Then there was periods of time where I distributed books in a devotee, and even had a little book table where I used to invite people to come and get a piece of laddu and take a book.
Nice.
And it was never quite as prolific as the board, but it was probably more fulfilling because it was so straightforward.
Yeah, I remember when you came to New Zealand in Auckland, that's how I first remember you and your dhoti, doing your little Charlie Chaplin kind of shuffle up to people and then, giving them books and things.
Charlie Chaplin shuffle?
Yeah.
Okay. That I don't remember.
It would be sort of like, I know you had your kind of motions that were quite amusing, that sort of grabbed people's attention, and then you'd walk up to them.
I realised later I was doing some work professionally later. This would be mid-noughties for a retail consultancy, and I was trying to show people in a retail store how to approach the customer. They were just terrified of approaching the customer, especially in England. It's just not done. People are browsing, you leave them to it. But the goal was to have them approach the customer and engage the customer in a conversation. And I realised I'd still had techniques from when I was a book distributor.
Right.
And it was it was almost like a mystic ability where you could pull someone's attention and engage them in a conversation fearlessly. That just, I had never really thought about it before until I could see that these poor people I was trying to educate about doing this didn't have the slightest idea. And it was true. I mean, it wasn't that you had, perfect mystic city, but on book distribution sometimes just by wanting someone to just stop, they would stop almost helplessly.
Amazing.
Lord Chaitanya's empowerment.
Yeah. And it's obviously a great training as well, you learned very useful life skills from it.
Yeah. And I certainly look back on those days with great fondness. I haven't been out on book distribution now for a few decades. I should do that again someday.
Yeah, I actually went out about a year ago after not doing it for a few years. It was an unusual feeling, but it was cool to be connected to it again. Those memories of those cool times. Yeah, my wife is the book distributor in the family now. She is totally fired up. She listens to Vaisnava Prabhu's podcast every second, and she just goes out whenever she gets the chance. It's really fire up. So then so you were doing travelling Sankirtan out of Soho Street, and then at some stage, what was the next step? You went to Dublin or something like that?
No, I was up in Leicester for a while. Even went up to Sheffield and thought about opening a place, but it was there were lots of strange goings on in terms of me changing ashram.
Right.
So I was in Soho Street through till about 91. And then, we went over to Belfast.
Belfast, that's it, yeah.
So just after I got married, Shri Ramaswamy asked me to run Belfast Temple.
So that must have been quite a shift then, from doing travelling book distribution and different things like that, and then having your own temple to kind of be in charge of.
Well, I'd been looking at other ways to maintain my ashram, but His Holiness Bhakti Churu Maharaj was insisting, no, I want you to work full time for ISKCON. So I didn't really know how to reconcile that. I went in front of Radha Vandana and prayed for some guidance as to how, particularly because at that time I was a bit disillusioned with the society. And I remember thinking, well, the only way I could really do that is if I had the decision-making power to change things.
Right.
And it was the very next day that Sri Ram Swami asked me to go to Belfast.
Oh, Krishna's arrangement, eh?
So it's nice. It was a mixed experience. I think I revelled in the responsibility, but I don't think I was a particularly mature manager, and I think the devotees there let me know.
So what were the things you were disillusioned about that you mentioned before?
Was
Was it to do with the society, or was it more personal things?
It was just viewing ISKCON leaders generally. I think by this time Prabhupada's letters had come out, and I was just thinking, I'm not sure that the decision making is always driven by fidelity to the spiritual master's instructions. Sometimes it feels like, decisions are made that are driven by maintenance of the temple as opposed to the ideals of the society. I mean, very general, but I don't really want to get too specific.
Yeah, that sort of thing, yeah. So you felt when you were a temple president that you could try to give a better example?
Yeah, which I think a lot of people do sit in judgment on temple leaders without necessarily ever having sat in the seat.
Right.
And I certainly became much more compassionate and understanding having sat in the seat. But these aren't easy roles. Srila Prabhupada's instructions are various and vast, sometimes very exacting, and you may have to be making do with a very, very small budget, minimal, human resources. My gut feel is that 99.9% of ISKCON leaders are very well intentioned, doing the best they can with what they have, whether that's the training they have, the resources they have. I think it's very easily, possibly even tempting, to scapegoat them for everything that's not right about the society, as if somehow just having authority
makes
you wave a magic wand.
So you were in Belfast and giving it a go, and then what happened next?
Giving it a go. I mean, I think we were maybe only about 10 residents.
Is that the temple that's in the island? Or that was a different place.
Belfast.
Right, that's actually in the city.
So it's right on the borderlands between the two communities as well, the two warring communities, almost in no man's land.
Oh, nice.
So just a few hundred metres one way is Polglass, which is a Catholic area. Just down the road the other way is Dunmurray, which is a Protestant area.
Wow. Did you feel unsafe at times?
Not specifically there at the temple. I remember once my wife and I went to see a movie called In the Name of the Father, which was about wrongly convicted IRA guy. I mean, he wasn't IRA, but he was interned, I think they called the Birmingham Six or something. And it was how they were mistreated. So we were there in a Catholic area watching the film with a British accent. That was scary.
I remember Janananda Maharaj was telling me that he was I think it was in Belfast, and someone came up to him in the street and said, "What are you, a Protestant or a Catholic?" And he said, "I'm a Hare Krishna." He says, "Are you a Protestant Hare Krishna or a Catholic Hare Krishna?"
This is a legendary. It is legendary. I remember, I think it was Shanika Rishi Prabhu who told me that someone had been delivering books in a nondescript van. So just a plain old white transit van. In the back, all these boxes, unmarked. And they'd pulled over into a lay-by to chant their Gayatri and fallen asleep. So there was a body that, for all intents and purposes, looked lifeless. With a string around the thumb. So, and apparently he used to sleep with his eyes open, which of course didn't help. So woke up a few minutes later with the whir of helicopters, one of these diffusing robots looking in through the window, a crowd of snipers around, and all they've done is nod off our chanting Gayatri. Again, I don't know, to what extent these are legendary or...
Well, as they say, never let truth get in the way of a good story.
So Belfast was a good, cutting my teeth. It really sobered me about what it meant to run a temple community. I have to say, it was too much for my wife at the time. Just she was attached to dressing Radha Londoneshwara, and Ireland wasn't particularly a good climate for her health. So we moved back to London. That would have been 92.
And then you became the temple president in Soho Street pretty much straight away? Or?
I became the temple manager initially, which was a sort of reworked version of the vice president. Reasonably quickly, I was a member of Paramakarun's congregational preaching department for a little while. But then Shiv Ram Swami asked me if I'd become the temple manager, which essentially meant that the temple president role was a preaching only kind of role, with all the financial responsibility and other decisions living with the temple manager. Mm-hmm. Kesava Bharati Prabhu was the temple president.
Right.
But then maybe it was about a year later or something like that. And it's quite possibly just wasn't happy that arrangement was viable.
Mm.
Then I became the TP, and I was maybe TP for about a year and a half.
That wasn't too long. And then you went to a manor after that?
When the manor came up, the Soho team at the time was really a galvanized team, really strong. And it felt like if we could get the manor and Soho Street working as a unit, working as a symbiotic relationship, that would be the best possible outcome all around. The manor was still attracting new devotees because it had the Bhakta program, but it didn't have a downtown location. Soho Street had the downtown location, but it had a limit on how many people it could house. So it felt like, particularly because they were so close together, but there was often border wars in terms of who gets to do book distribution where. But it seemed like, why didn't they work together as one integrated unit? So that was the hypothesis.
Right.
Akandali Prabhu had been the temple president, and then he'd retired. And Brigupati Prabhu was actually the person who became the TP of London.
Soho Street.
Soho Street.
And I stayed there for a little while when he was in charge.
Okay.
That was kind of fun.
And we had the same kind of arrangement where Vasudev Prabhu, who'd been running the restaurant, became the temple manager and had all the financial responsibilities and so on, and Brigupati Prabhu would be the preacher. But I think that changed after about 6 months or something like that.
Yeah. You mentioned Paramakaruna. He's a good friend of yours. I think he passed away recently.
Passed away, yeah, shocking.
Last year or so.
Something like that, just over a year ago.
Tell me a bit about him. It sounds like he was quite a thoughtful devotee, and he did some pretty
really
nice
thoughtful
preaching.
Devotee. He was a temple president's best friend. I'd say he's like a vizier, someone who's a great advisor. It was him through Sridhar Maharaj that introduced me to the 7 Habits as a way of thinking about a cultural change. And that was very much about what was the visitor experience like, and how could we create the best guest experience at Soho Street.
That's right. I remember Sridhar Maharaj was really into that. He showed us some videos of Disneyland and things like that.
Yeah, he was into Tom Peters and into others. So Parama was definitely the major brains trust for me when I was a TP. Wonderful devotee, very thoughtful, and a big loss.
Mm. You mentioned that he was doing some congregational preaching. What was that like?
He was working with another devotee who's left called Jad Bharat, who they were thinking of how do we transform the temple's reliance on sort of the hand-to-mouth book distribution income to one where favourable Indian families provided a monthly or weekly or annual donation, like to the patron program at the manor. Mm. And they built that up. They had cans in people's homes and lots of programs in people's homes. So I'd probably go out as a TP about 3 nights a week to programs in people's homes. And he was building that up. But it was just he was very forward thinking.
Yeah, I met him briefly when I was there, and I was quite impressed by his demeanour. He was quite a calm but obviously thoughtful person. Right. And it was quite interesting, some of the things that he said, and he confronted a few devotees, like I was at one of the ghosties there, and he sort of said, without going into details, he sort of confronted people, and but he'd get you thinking.
Yeah, he was ahead of his time.
Mm. So were you in touch with him when you were at the Bhaktivedanta Manor as well?
Unfortunately, it took me such a long time to get connected at the manor that by the time I'd really got my feet under the table there, most of that temple council had been disbanded.
Right. The crack team had sort of broken up.
I think, my duty Prabhu came in and he needed to establish a different way of doing things. So it's understandable he wanted to build his own team.
Yeah.
But that opportunity to really try and run the two as one sort of fell away.
Mm. Mm. What were some of the challenges that you had running the temple? And what was it like? I mean, what was your experience like in general? You obviously would have been quite excited to have that opportunity to go there. And there must have been challenges as well at the same time. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest challenges at the manor is tensions between the sub-constituent communities. So you've got the older Srila Prabhupada disciples who are accustomed to how things had been for so many years. You've got the fast-growing Indian community that in many ways has saved the temple. Mm. And there was just some tensions between those two communities. Mm. So trying to help everyone feel valued, connected, that their contribution mattered, that's probably one of the biggest challenges. I think that probably faces temple presence everywhere. Mm-hmm. Because often just the upkeep of the place. To be fair, the manor is so buoyant financially that upkeep isn't actually as stressful as it is. Soho Street, every finance meeting, we were looking for a few grand to make sure we could keep the lights on.
Right, well.
Belfast was a smaller problem, but it was the same degree of frequency and the same sort of anxieties. Never really felt quite the same at the manor. It was more about ensuring everyone felt heard, valued, loved. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what do you think about the idea that, Prabhupada's pranam mantra is about preaching to the West and that the Indians have taken over and, this kind of thing? and that we should try to preach to the local people more and that sort of thing?
I don't see the successful take-up by the Indian community as problematic. I think that was always going to happen. And I think in many ways we should be flattered that the presentation of Krishna consciousness is viewed by them as that much more exciting and authentic than any other offerings. It's not like we're the only providers of Sanatana Dharma in the Western world. I think the standard of deity worship, the liveliness of the kirtan, the quality of the prasad, the total temple experience is something that they naturally have responded to. And so we should be excited that we've been successful with that community. The imbalance or the relative disproportionate level of interest from that community versus locals simply highlights that we've not done enough local preaching. So it's not that there's a deviation that's happened or that we've given the keys to the kingdom to somebody else. We've just neglected to do enough local preaching, which takes far more imagination, because the serving up of here's a wonderful temple with gorgeous deities and so on is not going to appeal in the same way relevantly to the average person on the street in the UK, in the US, and Australia, and New Zealand. Finding a relevant thing that captures people's imaginations. We're getting it now a little bit with the kirtan movement and sort of the yoga circles, because obviously there's an adjacency there. They have a similar interest. Many of those people are already vegetarian, they're already thinking about bettering the planet. So clearly our messaging naturally coincides in some ways. Although to be fair, I don't think we're making as much as we could of the fact that we've got messages around natural living, we've got messages around balanced lives and so on. I think Srila Prabhupada was careful that we don't water down Krishna consciousness just to be appealing. But it's kind of weird that we're not necessarily the loudest voices in the kirtan movement. And that sometimes we're seen as a kind of orthodoxy that's a little stuffy or up itself in those kind of circles. So that's my general thoughts. I think we need to find a way to reinvigorate. A lot of that's to do with imagination, a lot of that's just to do with hard yakka.
Right. Just trying things and see what works and what doesn't work, and getting out there and giving it a go.
Srila Prabhupada referred to preaching as an austerity, the willingness to face rejection. Gallons of blood to make a devotee. All those kind of expressions are there that show us that maybe once we could pay the bills and keep the lights on, our hunger and appetite dissipated.
All right.
So that could be one of the challenges. Because there's the old saying about not using the deities to make a livelihood. Srila Prabhupada was really, really warned heavily about that. And the challenge is that the Indian community have been historically so generous that in fact they've kept the wolf from the door. And maybe, they've taken away some of the impetus, not intentionally, but it's taken away some of the impetus for people to get off the behinds.
Right. Yeah, some people argue that only Westerners can really preach to, local people can only preach to the local people. What do you think about that idea?
The world's so multicultural now. I'm not convinced. I mean, for instance, Jay Shetty's reaching quite an international audience. I don't think people go, he's for Indians, just because he happens to be an Indian. So I think people are probably a lot more open. Mostly they just need to know that you're relevant.
Yeah.
And that's not exclusively a Western thing. But I do think there may be some truth that if I'm, an Anglo-Saxon person coming along to the temple, and everywhere I look there's no other Anglo-Saxons, but there's only people from India, then I might go, oh, this looks like something for Indian people.
Yeah.
I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I think we also have to be careful not to become too identified with the body as we do all of this. Because if we place a different value on someone from an Indian background than we do from someone from a Western background, if we think someone from a Western background is more of an asset or a more significant conversion, I think that's getting dangerously close to a form of racism.
Yeah.
If not racist.
It's amazing how even when devotees, join the movement, they still have their racism. I had that experience just last week, wasn't it, on Facebook, where there was a discussion about the shooting in New Zealand, and then, air quotes, devotee was saying that, oh yeah, we have to watch out for these Muslims, and it's practically agreeing with the shooting. It was incredible. Couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that is just the Facebook kind of environment, but it's shocking sometimes to hear sentiments that appear to be fueled by nationalistic sentiments or racist sentiments. It does happen, and it's shocking. I get a sense that the percentage of the total diaspora of devotees that actually read and fully comprehend Prabhupada's books is small.
Yeah, I think that's an issue, isn't it? That like you've mentioned before, that this kirtan movement has taken off to some extent, so that's a bit of a revival there, but there needs to be a revival of really studying Prabhupada's books.
Yeah, I mean, Prabhupada gave so many gifts, but the one that he himself laboured the most and considered the most significant was his books. So in as much as we really appreciate his Sangha, we really appreciate the temples and the prasad and the deities, kirtan, to miss out on the literature that he left, yeah, that's a big miss.
Yeah, for sure. Just in general, what do you think is the the biggest need in the society? Like, this is obviously an important thing. Would you say that's the most important thing, or are there other things that you think are also important that we need to address?
Oh, okay, caught me off guard.
Big picture, kind of.
Well, the ability to represent the Siddhanta, because, as the saying goes, Sakaleneha Mahata Yoga Nashta Parantapa, due to the influence of time, the succession was broken. And it's scary, only 40 years after Srila Prabhupada leaves, to see how many various versions of the Siddhanta are circulating. How many people seem to openly challenge conclusions that Prabhupada gave us? So you wonder, a couple of generations from now, what will be the truths that are circulating?
Yeah. It's
so that I do think the full comprehension of Srila Prabhupada's books has to be a really, really big one. I think the social engineering is still needed. So probably the most visible failings are the failings to put the right framework in place for successive generations of devotees. Much is made of the abuse kind of stuff, but I think possibly even more significant is just the lack of provision that's made. So people are often just having to make their own way in the world. I'd like to see more communal mindedness and community initiatives. I think those things are happening, but the pace at which they're happening, that's kind of concerning.
What do you think could accelerate it, or what would happen? Can happen to make it happen, kind of thing? Is it an education thing, or is it more? It requires a kind of managerial organisation to make it happen, or is it just a combination of all those things?
Yes, it is. Ultimately, everything ever needs is initiative.
Right.
I think more and more devotees are exercising that initiative. So you are seeing more and more community efforts. I'd like to hope it gets sponsored and encouraged by the leadership. I don't know to what extent I'd ever expect it to be bankrolled by the leadership. Actually, that raises another thing that concerns me. The sannyasi good life concerns me. I worry that we're developing a cohort of leaders that have a kind of almost a megastar status, probably have a disproportionate control of overall societal resources. But potentially all going off in different directions. And few exemplifying sannyas dharma in the traditional sense, detachment and so on. So that's just another concern. I'm sorry, I'm not really answering your question about how I wasn't ready for some of these intense questions.
Yeah, sorry. So you were talking about initiative, so it's just giving people a bit of space or encouraging people to take initiative is something that, I'm not sure where that comes from, but when people can, individually, each person can do something.
So for instance, I've had the good fortune in the last couple of years to meet Kalakanta Prabhu, who's the GBC for agriculture, cow protection. And he seems to be starting some really interesting community dialogues. I know the temple that's close to me near Govardhan has actually got some interesting development going on. And I suspect there might be lots of cottage industry level of development in lots of places. But it'd be nice to see it getting a little bit more joined up. I don't know if that does require a GBC minister or if simply devotees taking the initiative to have forums and... I mean, you come across models like the Govardhan Eco Village. I've not been there, but it seems like a pretty amazing place. And it seems like Radhanath Maharaj has created an interesting network of counsellors. It'd be interesting to see one of these successful models duplicated. Not that we should have, one size fits all everywhere.
Yeah.
As Prabhupada wanted the individual striving and independent thought and action. But you'd like to think that there wasn't necessarily reinventing the wheel everywhere,
totally.
Where successful models could be learned from and adapted.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the ideas behind, the membership that I have started, is to try to connect up people that have got the idea to take some initiative and do things and collaborate, so like you're saying, the Eco Village, someone that's, doing something in the area of self-sufficient community can contact other people who are trying to do the same thing in other places, and they can share best practices and, discuss the challenges with each other, mastermind and things. Or maybe it's people trying to preach to the local people in the city, and sort of sharing the ideas.
I did some research at Gopal Bhatta Prabhu's request a few years ago for a GBC meeting, and it was looking at all of Prabhupada's letters on management and leadership. And the amount of times he used things like collectively, conjointly. So even though he didn't want there to be a centralized system, he certainly was hoping that people would voluntarily work together, make decisions together. My sense is we might have taken ownership, turned sand into gold to an extreme,
Right.
where our own preference for rugged individualism and autonomy may have superseded the idea of doing things as more of a collective. Anyway, it's just a thought.
You were earlier mentioning that even Charles Darwin talked about it.
Yeah, although survival of the fittest is the general meme that people have taken from Darwin, apparently mentions cooperation amongst a species several times more frequently.
Interesting, yeah.
And that nature is actually quite symbiotic rather than competitive.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Interesting twist. Yeah, well, it's getting late. I can see you've been working hard all day, and I'm working you hard into the night too.
And I'm not in my prime condition.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your time. Was there anything that you'd like to just sort of mention as we kind of wrap things up?
I think the vitality of the society is always going to be there as long as anyone's taking Prabhupada's messages as their heart and soul. So even though, in various forms around the world there might be trials and tribulations that society faces, as long as there's even one person who's vitally connected to the messages of Prabhupada, the society is not foregone. It's not, it's not in a woeful state. It's just growing pains. So I hope everyone can keep faith and find a way to constructively contribute.
Oh, nice. Yeah, so each one of us can try to be that person to keep it going.
That's the same. If we look at Srila Prabhupada's own example, what if the entire success of the Krishna conscious movement was down to your effort? It's not a bad meditation to have. It doesn't mean that we discount the fact that we can cooperate with everybody and should be looking to cooperate. But feeling that degree of personal responsibility might not be a bad thing.
Yeah. Okay, that's a brilliant place to end, and thanks for your time. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thanks for listening. To find out more, go to successfulvaishnavas.com.
Whatever little service that anyone can do for Krishna is to be appreciated and celebrated.
Just give this life to Krishna.
We know that they have much more potential than they're presently using.
I went to a place of relishing the activity and letting go of the result completely.
You just associate with pure devotees. Then you shall be able to cross over the ocean of Nissan.